banish him the realm.
It. I hope my sorrows will have end.
There's no friend but me.
Screen 2 presents Edward II, Sunday at 10.
Edward VIII is one of the famous figures of the 20th century, and he crops up when Clive James continues his study of fame, the famous and the infamous. That's on BBC One in about 10 minutes. Well, this is BBC 2, and time now for part 2 of the drama Clarissa. Having run away from her family to avoid a planned marriage, can Clarissa find a greater happiness with the dashing Lovelace?
A green and pleasant land, or an island awash with public cliché and private conflict? A continental perspective of the United Kingdom, the essential history of Europe, tomorrow, 8 o'clock on BBC2.
Sportsnight on One Now includes football action from the FA Cup with coverage of the replay between Bristol Rovers and Aston Villa. This is BBC 2, coming up in 5 minutes, Newsnight. First, party political broadcast by the Conservative Party.
In recent days, British troops have been risking their lives to save the lives of others. They're showing skill, professionalism, and sheer courage. We're right to be proud of them, very proud. Here at home, we've a lot to be proud of as well. We have a huge amount of talent in this country. Doctors, scientists, businessmen, engineers, musicians. We're one of the world's greatest trading nations. Even in difficult days, don't let us forget our strengths. This is the time to build on them, so that we can spread wealth and choice and opportunity even more widely. In every country across Europe, there are people without work. 17 million of them. Here at home, there are nearly 3 million. To get them back into work, we must build on the opportunities British business now has. We have low inflation. That means businesses can plan with confidence. It means savings keep their value. We have low interest rates, the lowest in the European community. And for millions of homeowners, mortgage payments are tumbling. Europe is now the biggest free trade area in the world, a market of 340 million people open to British business. And we're out to win in that market, backing our vital manufacturing industries. Last November, we announced a new strategy for growth, helping industry to invest, to expand, to create new jobs. Businessmen are now more confident about the future of their companies and of our country. If our young people are to make the most of their abilities, they must have the best possible start in life. That's why, like parents up and down the country, I want schools to get the basics right first. Reading, writing, adding up. Some people say that's old-fashioned. I think it's plain common sense. We've done a lot, but there's much more to do. Parents should be told the facts about schools. They want to judge for themselves how their children are doing. We must help good teachers. Give them the right training so that they can all give the best in the classroom to all the children in our schools. I want to do away with that artificial old distinction between blue-collar and white-collar worker, between academic and technician. We need them both, and we should value them both equally. What we need are worthwhile courses leading to good qualifications that employers value, skills the country needs, the best preparation for working life. We're determined to go on raising standards right across our public services. The Citizens' Charter is about giving a voice to those people whose voice is too often ignored. It's about standing up for ordinary men and women. In 1993, we face another great challenge, the battle against crime. We have made sentences tougher. We have cracked down on the so-called joyriders. We have put more policemen on the beat, but it clearly isn't enough. Sometimes I think as a nation we're too tolerant of crime. We seem to understand too much and condemn too little. I believe we all need to signal our disapproval more clearly. There is a difference between right and wrong, and we all need to change the climate against crime. We will go on taking tough action against violent crime, against the arrogant, brazen bullies who believe they can be above the law. And we're going to crack down on juvenile crime to stop it in its tracks before it becomes a habit. In the months ahead, my ministers will report back to the country on the progress we've made. Progress in making Britain more prosperous, more secure, better educated, better cared for. Progress in making Britain a more decent place. I know there's a lot to be done, and I know we can do it.
That was a party political broadcast by the Conservative Party. On The Late Show tonight, a profile of the filmmaker Molly Dineen, who shot, directed and edited the new BBC series The Ark. There's also a look at the battle over the ownership of book jacket illustrations. Who owns the rights, publisher or artist? That's in 45 minutes. First on to Newsnight.
We have heard the trumpets. We have changed the guard. And now, each in our own way, and with God's help, we must answer the call. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Good evening. So the most powerful office in the world passes from one party to another, from one man to another, from one generation to another. William Jefferson Clinton, 42nd President of the United States, promises change, sacrifice, and a government free of political intrigue, if such a thing can be imagined. George Bush, the young war hero who became Commander-in-Chief, has flown off into political history. In his place, the first president born since the war says Bush's departure ends an era of drift. But behind all the parades and bands and boundless optimism, what will the new presidency mean for America and for the rest of the world? Charles Wheeler analyses a speech replete with echoes of Kennedy and Roosevelt and wonders whether Clinton's in the same league.
Here at home, Labour Party leaders and senior trades unionists held their own bash for Bill Clinton at London's Dorchester Hotel. But the celebrations for America's president came amid controversy over Labour's approach to our Queen. Does the party believe the British monarchy must either change drastically or risk the rise of republicanism in Britain? I'll be putting that question to Labour's constitutional spokesman.
Bill Clinton is a man legendarily late for everything, with a flair for crisp oratory to rival Leonid Brezhnev. Today, he finished the presidential oath early and delivered a speech a fraction of the expected length, evidence perhaps of the way the office may already be changing the man. He could not have prayed for a clearer, crisper, kinder day for the carnival to mark the start of his presidency. He is 46 years old, and his promise to the American people was that a new generation will embrace change. In the last hour, as the tail-end Charlies of the parade have processed past their new president, America has begun digesting the fact that their commander-in-chief is a man who dodged the Vietnam draft. This energetic, schmaltzy, naive and yet exhilarating event marks not just the inauguration of a new president, but a ritual celebration of the American love affair with democracy. That process has now delivered them the third youngest president in their history, a man who proves that you can come from nowhere and get to the White House. When he took over the White House a short time ago, he was the first rock fan, the first child of television to do so. He promises change and is the change himself. By the time that Air Force One had taken George Bush off to retirement in Houston, Clinton had had his first briefing from the National Security Advisor on the situation in Iraq. Tonight, when he finishes his tour of the 10 inauguration balls, he might reflect that now he's obtained his lifetime's ambition, his problems may be just beginning. Well, the parade to mark the accession of President Clinton ended about 10 minutes ago on Pennsylvania Avenue, just down below us here in the Canadian Embassy. That was a whole hour or so later than had been expected. The heart of the wholesale and peaceful transfer of power that is the glory of the American Constitution consisted of 2 oaths, 2 prayers, 2 songs, a poem and a speech. The actual swearing in took fewer words than the Boy Scouts' oath of allegiance. The speech, which read better than it sounded, was laced with echoes of Kennedy and Roosevelt. Charles Wheeler has been analysing it.
Bill Clinton, far from being a country boy, is one of the most self-assured politicians ever to run for president. But this morning he was nervous, worried that his wife and daughter would make him late. The trouble was neither he nor Hillary could find their daughter Chelsea. The 13-year-old Chelsea was already in the car. By the time the Clintons had driven to the White House for the obligatory call on George and Barbara Bush, the president-elect had recovered his poise. The transition from outgoing to incoming president is something America always does splendidly, even after a harsh and sometimes intensely personal campaign. Over on Capitol Hill, meanwhile, the great and the good were assembling for the ceremony. Among them, several of yesterday's men. Jimmy Carter, who, like George Bush, was rejected after a single term, and his Vice President Walter Mondale, who also ran for president but never made it to the top. It was another of yesterday's men, Ronald Reagan, who wisely decided that the infinitely more impressive western face of the Capitol should be the place for such a ceremony. It is the new vice president who is the first to be sworn in.
I, Albert Gore, Jr., do solemnly swear that I will support
Albert Gore, easily young enough to have a realistic chance of enjoying an inauguration of his own one day, is already telling friends that he hasn't enough to do. If the president will use him, Gore is the ultimate Washington insider, and Clinton is too clever to make the mistake that Jimmy Carter made of ignoring the powers that be on Capitol Hill. Then it was Bill Clinton's turn.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
In modern times, few presidents have worked as hard as Clinton has to reach this office. Perhaps only Richard Nixon was equally determined. And now the speech that sets a president and the country on course for the next 4 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America, William Jefferson Clinton.
His theme was that this marks a change not just of government and party, but a change of generations.
My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal. This ceremony is held in the depth of winter. But by the words we speak and the faces we show the world, we force the spring. A spring reborn in the world's oldest democracy that brings forth the vision and courage to reinvent America. Each generation of Americans must define what it means to be an American. On behalf of our nation, I salute my predecessor, President Bush, for his half-century of service to America.
That seemed rather more than a routine nod to the man he defeated. All new presidents promise to be healers. Perhaps this one means it. Nevertheless, as he continued, Bill Clinton sounded like a classic Democrat. It's 12 long years since sentiments like these were heard at a presidential inauguration.
But when most people are working harder for less, when others cannot work at all, when the cost of health care devastates families and threatens to bankrupt our enterprises great and small, when the fear of crime robs law-abiding citizens of their freedom, and when millions of poor children cannot even imagine the lives we are calling them to lead. We have not made change our friend.
What followed was an echo not of the distant past, but of the campaign that Clinton won by shifting his party to the right.
It is time to break the bad habit of expecting something for nothing from our government or from each other. Let us all take more responsibilities, not only for ourselves and our families, but for our communities and our country.
Then another warning. Stern words for lobbyists and self-serving politicians.
This beautiful capital, like every capital since the dawn of civilization, is often a place of intrigue and calculation. Powerful people maneuver for position and worry endlessly about who is in and who is out, who is up and who is down, forgetting those people whose toil and sweat sends us here and pays our way. Let us resolve to reform our politics so that power and privilege no longer shout down the voice of the people.
Foreign affairs figured briefly. It was enough to tell the world to expect a seamless foreign policy, at least for now.
When our vital interests are challenged or the will and conscience of the international community is defied, we will act. With peaceful diplomacy whenever possible, with force when necessary. The brave Americans serving our nation today in the Persian Gulf, in Somalia, and wherever else they stand are testament to our resolve. But our greatest strength is the power of our ideas. My fellow Americans, you too must play your part in our renewal. We have heard the trumpets. We have changed the guard. And now, each in our own way, and with God's help, we must answer the call. Thank you, and God bless you all.
At 15 minutes, his first speech as president was surprisingly short. Many would say commendably so, for Clinton has seemed incurably wordy. It's unlikely to prove an historic speech, but it adequately matched the occasion, even if it told us nothing new about Bill Clinton. As he comes to office, he remains an enigma.
Well, now, what do we make of President Clinton? With us in the studio are Congressman Jim Leach from Iowa and the newly elected Congressman for Ohio, Cheryl Brown. Jim Leach, the crowd today seem to have hugely high expectations of this man. He's going to have a heck of a job meeting them, isn't he?
Well, he is, and today was basically all about the celebration of democratic transition. There was very little delineation of policy, and the great choice the president has to make is he's got two campaign commitments extant. One is to gin up the economy with more programs in a liberal democratic way, and the other is to reduce the deficit, and he clearly hasn't made that choice yet, and when he does, he's going to have something to pay.
What did you think of the speech, Cheryl Brown?
I think more than anything that his message, well, State of the inaugural speeches typically are not prescriptive. Don't say I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. The message here was that America can succeed. This has become a country in the last few years that has doubted itself, perhaps much too often, perhaps more than we should in many ways. And I think Clinton today, President Clinton, gave people a good deal of hope, but also gave the Democrats, those of us in the new Congress, a responsibility to do something.
People recall speeches, but they judge by action, don't they? And we didn't get many clues to action in that speech. Charles Wheeler described it as an enigma at the end of it.
Well, actually, there were clues, but on all sides of the dilemma. I mean, he said he was going to seek sacrifice. He also indicated some areas that he was going to spend more money, such as health care. And so, to date, we just have hints, and the difficult decisions are ahead. But what was captured very brilliantly in American context in this speech was this whole issue of generational change, new, young, different.
He fired a couple of shots across the bows of the lobbyists and indeed of Congress, I thought. The supposition that because there's now Democratic control in the Congress and the Senate is somehow going to make it easy for him, it doesn't necessarily hold water, does it?
If you look back 16 years, it didn't with then incoming President Carter. But leadership, freshman Democrats, all of us across the board understand if we don't succeed, this time with health care and with long-term economic growth, putting that in place, then we as a Democratic Party aren't going to have another one of these inaugural celebrations till 20 years. I mean, that's what a lot of us think. And so I think you're going to see us move forward and particularly accomplish those two things, universal health care and long-term preparation for long-term growth in the economy.
But you can't reconcile that with cutting the deficit.
I think ultimately you can. I think short-term you can't. If he does a job stimulus, and Jim is right about that, that's the problem with the deficit.
Do you think it was wise to so consciously rouse echoes of Kennedy?
I think his statement, "This is our time," or "This is our time now," however he said it, if I recall, was wise, not just in light of a generational change, first post-war president, first president that hadn't been in World War II, served in World War II or been in that era. It also was post-Cold War, and it was I think it probably encapsulated that we as a nation now move on. The New World Order of the outgoing president had not really been understood, and this generation understands it, and he would move forward with it.
Jim Leach, did you find his invoking of the ghost of Jack Kennedy convincing?
Well, I think Mr. Clinton has his own personality, but if there are any analogies that he would like to make, they are to Mr. Kennedy, and it's kind of a 50-50 circumstance whether he's going to become a Kennedy or a Carter. Frankly, I think as each day passes, it's more likely to be a Kennedy, that there's a greater likelihood of success. As much for any reason, the American public desperately wants a successful presidency. We all, as a society, have a vested interest in it, and my view is this is going to be a successful presidency.
It's surprising, isn't it, though, given his reputation as a technocrat and a master of detail and policy detail, that he seems to be, in many respects, rather unprepared.
Well, he's a policy maven, but he's not one that's steeped in the institutional processes of Washington. And that comes with experience, osmosis, and will have a lot to do with who he puts around him. And there we've had very few appointments yet to be made.
And he's energized by voters, by real people, and he's energized by other politicians. There's a story that he would, when feeling sort of depressed or feeling tired, as governor, he would walk down to the legislature and just start talking to legislators about policy and almost talking about their families or whatever, and it energizes him, and he loves the process so much, and he loves to make the system work that way, certainly more than Carter, and perhaps more than most of his predecessors.
To interpose a domestic note for a British audience, is the reputed animosity that he feels towards John Major because of the way that Mr. Major encouraged the Conservative Party to help George Bush likely to be a continuing problem?
I don't think so. One of the things about the United States is that we are deeply tied to Great Britain emotionally. President Clinton studied in Great Britain. There'll always be a few differences in political leadership, but of all the relationships that I would assume would be ironclad, it would be the British-American one. And I would look for no difficulty whatsoever.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. Thank you. Well, something almost mystical happened here today. As much as a change of president, the tens of thousands of people on the streets of Washington were celebrating the belief in the future that underlies the American dream. In less than a minute, Bill Clinton was transformed from plain American to president of the most powerful nation on earth and commander-in-chief of one of the most powerful forces ever seen. No community will be more affected than Washington, a city built on politics the way other places are built on coal or steel or trade. Anthony Howard's been out and about.
Washington is a city that exists for power. If you lose it, you may not immediately become a non-person, but it's not long before you're translated into yesterday's man. There's no more poignant journey for an ex-president, especially a defeated one, than that in which he departs from Washington for the last time. George Bush left today in a Marine helicopter, supplied out of courtesy by his successor, Bill Clinton.
It's 16 years since Washington last celebrated a Democratic presidential victory. And there's a sense not just of excitement, but almost of elation here today. In truth, Washington has never been a Republican city. Through all the Bush, Reagan, Nixon years, it consistently kept the faith and always voted for Democratic, defeated presidential standard bearers. So this year's presidential parade is not just a passing political carnival. It's a genuine festival of local rejoicing.
The inaugural parade has always formed a unique and characteristically American part of the inauguration ceremonies. Along with his speech, it provides the first indication of the style that a new president intends to bring to the White House. As a lounge-suited Bill Clinton and his wife walked informally down Pennsylvania Avenue this afternoon, even deliberately overshooting the presidential viewing stand, the message was of a relaxed, laid-back, and distinctly unstuffy new brand of American leadership. Eventually, Bill Clinton got to the viewing stand, and at first, the parade was conventional enough. But its flavor soon changed to that of small-town America. Here was a young man, a teenager in the 1960s, reaching back to the country of his youth. It had, of course, been quite a journey. Who even a decade ago would have dreamt that a Vietnam War resistor would end up as President of the United States?
Well, the serious business of the inauguration is over, but what's been most disorienting about the whole thing has been how an administration which declares itself committed to the little people is riding to power in a whirl of stretched limos, black ties, fur coats and sheer vulgarity. The public events have been orchestrated for television by a sitcom producer. Corporations have divvied up millions in sponsorship, believing they'll get their rewards later. The culmination was a concert called the Presidential Gala last night. Just getting a seat to mark the return of Washington to the people cost $1,000. Lauren Bacall would have liked to go, but she couldn't afford it. She may have been the lucky one. Macaulay Culkin made you wish the villains in Home Alone had been homicidal and successful.
I didn't even know what a presidential inauguration party was. But then again, so I've been told. Till recently, neither did the Democratic Party.
Chuck Berry made My Ding-a-Ling sound like opera.
If that not watching it was 7:45, you know Bill's gonna get this country straight.
And Michael Jackson deigned to give Bill Clinton the briefest of handshakes. Well, now, joining us to chew the fat further over the new President Clinton are Tom Oliphant of the Boston Globe and Andrew Sullivan, the editor of the New Republic. We're also joined by Charles Wheeler. Let's start, first of all, with the speech. Tom, what did you make of it?
I thought it was an interesting attempt to avoid specificity on purpose, while nonetheless establishing a theme. And the theme that I heard was this effort to break democracy's Gordian knot, what we call gridlock. It's the summoning of a spirit rather than an attempt to attract allegiance to a particular program. Most people are analyzing it tonight for its vagueness. My tendency is to be intrigued at its political intelligence.
Andrew Sullivan, what did you make of it?
I was trying to think of something to say about it, and I realized I couldn't remember anything he actually said. I thought what was interesting was how similar it was to Bush's. Bush came in, we were going to compromise with Congress, I open out my hands to you, we're going to get things done. It wasn't clear what he was going to do, but the whole process was what seemed to be the most important thing. And what Clinton needs to do, of course, is articulate exactly what he's going to do and how he's going to do it.
But he can presumably do that at State of the Union speech or at any time in the next few months.
He did try and do it in the campaign. A president has to have got this far with some idea of what he's doing in order to carry it out in the first 6 months.
Charles Wheeler, your piece, you just said that we ended up talking about him being an enigma. Wasn't it odd?
Still an enigma, yes. But I don't think we can expect inauguration speeches to tell us very much about the person, what the president is going to do. I think we're all a bit mesmerized by history. Kennedy's speech, we still remember it, people still quote it, and ever since everything else has been judged by that. That's perhaps unfair, because he had Sorensen writing it for him.
Was it odd to you that having mentioned so much during the campaign, this idea of the new covenant, it didn't get a single mention?
No, though the core of it did get the mention, and that is that while you give benefits, you ask responsibility in return. I would slightly add to what's been said here that where Clinton, I think, breaks some new ground is that he manages to use some words that I heard, bold, and the particular homage that he paid to the core of FDR's spiritual being, which was bold, persistent experimentation. And this is non-ideological. If there's one thing Clinton taught us in this campaign, is that perhaps choices in America are being poorly framed, left, right, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, and that there is in him a combination of, synthesis, perhaps, certain none of the aboveness. It's interesting to watch the disparity between the public's expectations and our crankiness in this week.
We've got a speech, we've got a cabinet appointed, we've got various other prominent figures in the administration. What do you make putting all of that together, Andrew Sullivan?
Well, I would love to believe what Thomas just said. If you look at the cabinet appointments, they're very similar to the speech. They seem to have, I mean, this was a president elected for change, for making liberalism work again, and then you suddenly had a cabinet which is entirely the Democratic establishment appointing itself. All the opportunities he had to pick anybody in the country for daring new directions, and he picked the usual characters.
It's very difficult. After 13 years out of power, it's very hard to find like-minded, relatively like-minded people, particularly in a party which has lost election after election by being too far on the left. Here is this man, he shifts the party to the right. He must have cabinet and other appointments from his own party. They've been out of power for 13 years, and when they were in power, they were left-wingers. So where does he go? It's very difficult.
All the major contenders from the right of the party were lost in this cabinet. I mean, there were very few of them appointed to high positions. All the thinkers lost. Very few people from the Democratic Leadership Council are in power.
Why does anybody, no American president really cares much for his cabinet anyway. This is an extremely self-reliant man. Do you agree?
I think that's the key point, and without begging the question of what happens next, which we can't answer, is that it's almost as if he's saying, I'll be the new ideas person. You, the Democratic establishment that I've put in my cabinet, you get this thing done. You get it passed by Congress. You make it work. I'll be in charge of the ideas. That at least hints at a kind of activist presidency, a philosophy of activism that is a bit new to America after 20 years.
There does seem to be a tremendous fund of goodwill towards him at present, doesn't there? I mean, how long is that going to last?
I don't think it's so much directed at him as it is a hope that after